Well, you might not think it, but celebrities are real people too, and as such are subject to the same accidents, disasters, and other tragedies as the rest of us. These stars witnessed terrible things and live to tell the tale.
But what if a tornado, an F5 tornado, were to appear out of nowhere, with no warning at all?
Well, it happened. On April 5th, 1936, Tupelo, Mississippi endured one of the deadliest weather events in United States history. The Tupelo tornado killed more than 200 people, and it was just one element of a storm system that tore across the southeast over 2 days, beginning in Arkansas. When the storm hit Tupelo, it left 11 people dead on the town outskirts before moving downtown and into the surrounding neighborhoods. In addition to leaving at least 216 people dead, more than 1,000 people may have been injured. If you're not familiar with the Fujita scale used to classify tornadoes and their damage, the scale goes from F0 to F5, with F5 being the most severe. This one hit the top of the scale. Elvis Presley was born in Tupelo, Mississippi, and spent the first 15 years of his life there. When the Tupelo tornado struck in 1936, Presley was only 15 months old, and he and his family waited out the storm at the home of his great-uncle. Somewhere around 48 blocks were completely destroyed. Fortunately, the Presley family home suffered no damage at all. In September 2008, Travis DJ AM played a free show at the University of South Carolina in Columbia. The ex-primary members were Blink-182 drummer Travis Barker and DJ AM, or Adam Goldstein. After the show, the musicians boarded a small plane to head back to California, but just after takeoff, the plane overshot the runway and crashed into a wall, bursting into flames.
The plane was completely on fire. We were a ball of fire in the sky.
4 passengers died immediately, but Goldstein and Barker survived. Barker escaped the fiery wreckage through an emergency exit, but just barely. He told Joe Rogan, "I jumped right into the jet, which is full of fuel. My whole body lit up. I had jet fuel on my whole body." The survivors were rushed to the Joseph M. Still Burn Center in Augusta, Georgia in critical condition. Barker was burned over 2/3 of his body. It took 26 surgeries, multiple skin grafts, and 3 months of recovery and physical therapy before he could properly walk again. Before the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor and the United States formally entered World War II, 24-year-old John F. Kennedy joined the U.S. Navy. He was promoted to the rank of lieutenant junior grade and assigned to command a PT boat, a long, fast torpedo-equipped watercraft deployed on patrols and also in battle. Lieutenant Kennedy assumed command of PT-109 in April 1943 and was one of several sent to assist the invasion of New Georgia and the Solomon Islands, a skirmish in the Pacific Theater. Their mission was to harass Japanese supply ships, but on the evening of August 1st, a Japanese destroyer opened fire and tore Kennedy's boat in half. 2 crewmen were never seen again, several others were severely injured, and the survivors were left stranded with the burning wreck and the nearest land more than 3 miles away. Kennedy swam for 3 hours, gathering his surviving men together onto the wreckage. One of those, engineer Patrick McMahon, had suffered life-threatening burns. The following day, the wreckage began to sink.
They're drifting, holding onto the hull and drifting in the water when he sees a group of islands about 3 miles off.
That's when Kennedy decided they would swim for shore. He personally saved McMahon by holding the strap of his life vest in his teeth as he swam. You know Yogi Berra. He played for the New York Yankees for 18 seasons, won 10 World Series championships, and was named American League MVP 3 times. His career may have lasted longer. Berra was playing minor league ball in 1943, but he didn't appear in the Yankees uniform until 1946, because he joined the U.S. Navy at the peak of combat operations during World War II. On June 6, 1944, 150,000 troops representing the allied nations of the US, UK, Canada, Norway, and Free France stormed the beaches of Normandy in an operation that turned the tide of the war for the Allies. 19-year-old Berra was one of 6 members in the Navy selected and trained to operate a seafaring craft armed with rockets and machine guns that would ultimately be one of the first to arrive on the beaches of D-Day. Berra fired at and took out German machine gunners on shore to provide safe passage for the thousands of troops running and on foot behind him. It was an extraordinarily dangerous mission, and while successful, it resulted in significant losses. More than 12,000 Allied individuals died, were injured, or were captured. But not Berra. He survived to take part in a similar Navy-powered drive to free southern France later in 1944. If you've ever wondered what happened to the hair metal bands of the 1980s, the answer is often that they just kept touring, playing smaller and smaller venues, like the station in West Warwick, Rhode Island. On February 20th, 2003, the station hosted Great White, or at least a partial reunion of the original Great White, dubbed Jack Russell's Great White, and more than 400 fans showed up. As the band began to play, the tour manager set off pyrotechnics, despite being expressly told not to do so due to the danger of using fire in such an enclosed space. Within seconds, the club erupted in flames.
Before you knew it, the lights went out, and it was all over.
Russell tried to douse the fire by pouring cups of water on it, which did nothing. He and the rest of the band managed to escape the venue through a stage door. Meanwhile, the 400 people inside panicked as the fire raged, exploding beams, the roof, and liquor bottles in the bar. 2 of the exits had been barricaded, leading to a crush of people at the single main entrance, trapping them in the inferno. In the documentary America's Deadliest Concert, The Guest List, Russell reflected, "I know what happened, and I'm not going to put the blame on anybody. It was just a horrible, horrible tragedy, and I wish I could go back and cancel that show." The fire killed 100 people that night. Interior designer Nate Berkus has hosted his own daytime talk show as well as a number of other HGTV programs, and has his name on several different product lines. But the moment Berkus' career took off was bittersweet, and it followed a horrific personal tragedy. What became known as the Boxing Day tsunami began just before 8 a.m. on December 26, 2004, when one of the strongest earthquakes ever recorded, hitting 9.1 on the Richter scale, rumbled below the Indian Ocean. The quake set off violent tidal waves, some moving as fast as 500 miles per hour. Banda Aceh, a city on the Indonesian island of Sumatra, was buried, killing 100,000 people. In Thailand, 5,400 people lost their lives. Resorts and tourist spots throughout Southeast Asia were devastated, including Aragon Bay in Sri Lanka. That's where Berkus and his partner, photographic artist Fernando Bengoechea, were vacationing. Bengoechea is believed to have been swept out to sea and drowned, but his body was never recovered.
I believe that I survived this tsunami so that I would be able to understand how Fernando died.
Miraculously, Berkus survived with only superficial injuries. Speaking with People, he shared, "I had scars. I have scars still, not extensive, but if you know, you know." Another big name who survived the 2004 Boxing Day tsunami was action movie superstar Jet Li. On the day of the tsunami, Li was at the Four Seasons in the Maldives. It wasn't Li's first earthquake, so when he felt the tremors, he wasn't alarmed. He went about his day, taking his daughters to the beach about 2 hours later. Speaking with Newsweek, Li recalled, "We were just outside the hotel, by the pool and slightly above the beach, when I saw the water come. Li and the nanny each grabbed a child and ran for the hotel, but found themselves underwater after a few steps." Li remembered, "I turned back and everything, the beach, the swimming pool, was gone." Li called out for help and 4 men pulled the group to safety. One of the most powerful first ladies in U.S. history, Eleanor Roosevelt held the position longer than any other FLOTUS, from 1933 to 1945. Both of Roosevelt's parents were members of prominent political families. Her father was Theodore Roosevelt's brother, and her mother was linked to the Livingstons. Her social status meant Roosevelt was used to the high life. On May 19, 1887, 2-year-old Eleanor and her parents were on board the White Star ocean liner SS Britannic. The ship had just left port in New York City, headed for Liverpool, England. More than 300 miles off the coast of New Jersey, the Britannic was pushing through dense fog when it was hit by another White Star liner, the Celtic. The 2 ships collided at a particularly violent near right angle. The sharp bow of the Celtic plunged 10 feet into the side of the Britannic. The impact immediately killed 6 people in the steerage section of the Britannic, while another 6 fell into the sea and were presumed dead. Young Eleanor was among the ship's survivors, but she reportedly developed a lifelong fear of water from that point on. Charles Nelson Reilly was a legend on Match Game, but he was also a Broadway legend. He won a Tony for acting in the 1961 musical How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying. When he was 13 years old, Reilly was among the estimated 6,000 to 8,000 audience members gathered under the Big Top to see a performance of the Ringling Brothers Barnum and Bailey Circus on Barber Street in Hartford, Connecticut. As the Great Wallendas began their legendary trapeze act, a fire broke out, likely caused by a smoldering cigarette butt. The surface quickly became engulfed in flames, fueled by the extremely flammable paraffin wax and gasoline used for waterproofing. Screaming patrons rushed for the exits, but many were blocked by animal cages. Chunks of flaming canvas fell onto the crowd as they pushed and tore their way to safety. In under 10 minutes, the entire Big Top was destroyed and 170 people had been killed by a combination of fire, smoke, and stampede. Reilly managed to survive, but for the rest of his life, he had difficulty being in crowds of people. As a teenager in 1967, Alex Chilton scored a #1 hit, The Letter, with the Box Tops. When the group split up, Chilton moved on to Big Star, an influential band who never managed to sell a lot of albums. Big Star broke up after just 4 years, and in 1982, Chilton, tired of being jerked around by the music industry, left his hometown of Memphis to start over in New Orleans. While playing in bar bands and working a string of regular guy jobs, Chilton saved enough money to buy a weathered 19th century Creole cottage in the Treme neighborhood. When Hurricane Katrina pummeled New Orleans in August 2005, Treme was hit hard by floodwaters and high winds. In total, the disaster was responsible for $81 billion worth of damages to the city. Many residents lost their homes and 1,500 people died.
This is what's left. You know, your whole history is just somewhere under a pile of rubble.
Chilton's home suffered the wrath of the hurricane, and he very nearly lost his life. The raised structure didn't flood, but its outer walls barely withstood the storm's high winds. Still, Chilton refused to evacuate, nailing boards to the windows and sheltering in place, without power or cell service, fearful of looters. After 5 terrifying days, feeling abandoned and running out of food, Chilton climbed onto his roof and waved his arms until he attracted the attention of a helicopter which airlifted him to safety. Another figure in American music history who survived the devastation of Hurricane Katrina was Fats Domino. Domino was a pioneer of the New Orleans school of R&B that helped form the basis for early rock and roll. The notoriously shy Domino was born and spent his life in New Orleans. When the lower Ninth Ward began to flood, he refused to evacuate. He stayed behind to watch over his ailing wife, Rosemary. For days, Domino's friends and relatives weren't able to reach him. He was even presumed dead after media outlets captured a message scrawled on the musician's home reading, "R.I.P. Fats, you will be missed." Hours after Domino's supposed death began to hit the news, CNN confirmed that he'd been pulled out of the second floor of his flooded home by a Coast Guard helicopter. The Beverly Hills Supper Club, a cabaret-style nightclub outside Cincinnati, drew huge crowds with its slate of dinner, cocktails, and major acts.
Once you got into your chair, you couldn't get out. That's how close they packed them in for the show.
That's obviously a bad thing if something goes wrong. On May 28, 1977, 1,200 people, double the capacity of the entire venue, packed into the club's cabaret room to see John Davidson, a Broadway star, crooner, and host of The John Davidson Show. The opening act was a pair of ventriloquists, Teeter and McDonald. As they took the stage, an electrical fire began in the empty Zebra Room, spreading noxious fumes and smoke into the cabaret room.
It built up so much heat that the room and all its furnishings literally exploded into flames.
A busboy interrupted the ventriloquist to urge the audience to evacuate. The crowd thought it was part of the show, even going so far as to laugh at him. Those who did try to get out struggled to do so in the packed room. Davidson helped evacuate the room by holding open an out-of-the-way back door entrance.
I was one of the lucky ones that got out through a door that was just put in the year before.
Not everyone was so lucky. Davidson's musical director died in the fire, and he was called to identify the body at an emergency morgue set up at a nearby gymnasium.
Changed my life and changed so many lives. It made me reevaluate the value of life and how fragile we all are.
While Davidson did help save lives that night, many fans were trapped inside the room as it filled with fire and smoke. All told, 165 people died in the fire. A little after 3 p.m. on August 28, 1990, a tornado registering at the maximum level of F5 hit the Chicago suburb of Plainfield, Illinois. Wind speeds were estimated to be 318 miles per hour. In just 30 minutes' time, the twister created a path of destruction 16.4 miles long and as much as half a mile wide.
It was the most powerful August tornado to ever strike the United States.
It killed 29 people, injured 350 more, and left behind $160 million in property damage. About 1,000 homes were damaged, and 470 were completely destroyed. Future movie star Melissa McCarthy was raised in Plainfield, and she was home from college that weekend to see her parents and friends. She was hanging out with a friend at a townhouse when the tornado hit. On an episode of Hot Ones, McCarthy recalled, "We were sitting on the couch in front of patio windows. I don't remember what happened, but I think it must have been a pressure change, and I just remember him grabbing me really roughly and jerking me by the shirt, and we went toward his basement stairs." When they ascended the stairs, they discovered that the windows had all been blown out, the top level of the home had been torn away by the tornado, and the entire block of townhouses had been destroyed. From 1965 to 1971, Robert Clary co-starred on the sitcom Hogan's Heroes as Corporal Louis LeBeau. That very dark premise somehow fueled a lot of comedy, offering a lighthearted view of the horrific setting Clary had endured in real life 2 decades earlier. Clary was also French, and as a teenager, he and the other Jewish residents of Paris were arrested when the Nazis occupied the city after the Battle of France.
We were not allowed to be in show business. We were not allowed to be in the street after 8 p.m.
Clary was sent to a slave labor camp in Germany where he was forced to make shoes, while Allied air raids frequently bombed the facility. He also survived the Nazi death camp Buchenwald, where around 56,000 people, primarily Jews, were systematically killed. Clary's talent is what enabled his survival. He was a gifted singer and accordion player, and while in the camp, Nazi officers and guards forced him to perform for them. Years later, he told The Hollywood Reporter, "Singing, entertaining, and being in kind of good health at my age, that's why I survived." Near the end of the war, Clary was among the contingent of 4,000 surviving Nazi prisoners forced to participate in a death march of several hundred miles. Along the way, 2,500 people perished. The story of legendary soul singer-songwriter Otis Redding is forever linked to that of his explosive backing band, the Bar-Kays. Part of the burgeoning Memphis soul scene, the Bar-Kays formed in 1964 as an instrumental act and studio collective, including a guitarist and drummer, an organist, and a horn section. In 1966, when Redding's career started to take off with hits like Respect and Try a Little Tenderness, he needed a solid band to back him up. So in 1967, he hired the Bar-Kays. On December 9, 1967, 2 days after he recorded what would become his signature tune, Sitting on the Dock of the Bay, Redding and the Bar-Kays headed to a studio in Cleveland to tape a performance on the nationally broadcast music show Upbeat, then boarded Redding's newly purchased private plane to jet to the next gig. But just 4 miles from the Madison Municipal Airport in Wisconsin, the plane malfunctioned and crashed into Lake Monona. Redding, who was just 26 years old, died in the crash along with the flight crew, a road manager, and 4 members of the Bar-Kays. The only survivor of the accident was the band's trumpet player, Ben Cauley. One other member of the band survived. Bass player James Alexander wasn't on the plane. He opted to take a different flight to Madison. London stage star Betsy Drake was headed for the United States on board the ocean liner Queen Mary in 1947, where she spent much of the voyage rebuffing the romantic advances of superstar Cary Grant. She ultimately gave in to his persistence. He found her in New York and they began a personal and professional relationship, marrying in 1949 and starring opposite one another in, ironically enough, Every Girl Should Be Married, and in a bit of foreshadowing, Room for One More. Drake more or less retired from acting in the early 50s, and when she visited Grant in Spain on the set of The Pride and Passion, she got the feeling he was having an affair with his co-star Sophia Loren. The upset Drake quickly booked passage back to the US on the Italian ocean liner Andrea Doria, boarding at Gibraltar. There were around 1,100 people and 572 crew members on board the ship when, on the last night of the trip, and hours before they were supposed to dock in New York, the boat was sailing near the coast of Nantucket. The skies that night were so foggy that the MS Stockholm never saw the Andrea Doria in its path. The two ships collided, causing the Andrea Doria to capsize. Drake was in her stateroom reading at the moment of impact, and after feeling the collision, she immediately put on her life vest and headed to an upper deck and evacuated safely. She was among the 1,660 people rescued that night, but 46 people died in the accident. On Friday, November 13, 2015, terrorists associated with ISIS launched a coordinated attack on the city of Paris. At 9:20 p.m., 3 bombs exploded all at once inside the crowded Stade de France sports venue. Elsewhere around the metropolitan area, at almost exactly the same time, 4 shooters opened fire at packed bars and restaurants. The deadliest and most brutal attack of the evening occurred at the Bataclan, a 1,500-seat concert hall hosting a sold-out performance by the hard rock band Eagles of Death Metal. The American group, led by singer Jesse Hughes, was on stage when 3 ISIS gunmen forced their way inside and began to fire into the crowd. Hughes and his bandmates rushed backstage to what they thought was safety, but Hughes found himself face-to-face with a man pointing a gun at him. He later told Sweden's TV4, "I thought I was dead. I just waited for the shots to hit me." Miraculously, he was able to run to safety. But elsewhere in the club, Eagles of Death Metal merch organizer Nick Alexander was shot and killed along with 3 representatives of the band's record label.
It was such a long attack that I don't think anyone thought they were getting out of there alive.
Across all 6 terrorist assaults, 352 people were injured and 130 died. 89 of those deaths came at the Eagles of Death Metal show.
You remember where you were and what the day was like, the weather, the blue skies.
Chef luminary Michael Lomonaco attracted crowds to Le Cirque and the 21 Club before he took over as culinary director at Windows on the World in 1997. An upscale restaurant with an impeccable reputation and impressive views, Windows on the World was located on the 106th and 107th floors of the North Tower of the World Trade Center. Lomonaco reported for work on the morning of September 11, 2001 as usual. But that morning, he was earlier than expected, arriving around 8:30, so he decided to get his broken eyeglasses fixed at an optometry office in the WTC's shopping mall. He was waiting for the repair to be complete at 8:46 a.m. when there was a deafening crash all around him. Speaking to Market Watch, Lomonaco recalled, "I just thought, could that be the subway?" It turns out it was the impact of the first plane. Lomonaco quickly exited the building as debris fell from high in the towers, very near the location of Windows on the World. He decided to head back inside to help evacuate his employees and was on the way when the second plane hit the South Tower. Lomonaco remembered, "I heard the roar of the jet engines. I looked up at the moment of impact." Following her 1996 divorce from Prince Andrew, Sarah Ferguson devoted herself to working with nonprofit groups and charities. She helped form one such group, Chances for Children, which kept an office on the 101st floor of New York City's World Trade Center. Ferguson was due at her organization's headquarters for an 8:45 a.m. meeting on September 11, 2001. She was running late that morning. Her car pulled up to the building at about 8:47 a.m., mere seconds after American Airlines Flight 11 slammed into the North Tower. Chances for Children staff may very well have died that day had they been in the office and not in the lobby waiting to receive Ferguson. When she arrived, she ushered the employees into her car and they all fled to safety.